We all know that privacy is kind of hard to come by in the 21st century, but I think that a harder question to answer is, do we even deserve it? And if so, how much? I think that I personally, and maybe some of you who are watching, might be guilty of really wanting privacy, but also kind of oversharing on things like social media. I'm also guilty of feeling like I kind of want the government to protect me, but I don't really know how much I want them monitoring me. We live in a world where we just willingly hand over our data with a click. So is privacy really a right, or is it just kind of a privilege that we've romanticized? As you can probably tell, the TikTok ban has kind of got me thinking. At the time that this is going to be published, the TikTok ban has already happened and then been revoked. I don't know how much faith I have in the US government and how much they know about technology when they start asking questions like,
Mr. Chu, does TikTok access the home Wi-Fi network?
Only if the user turns on the Wi-Fi. I'm sorry, I may not understand the.
So if I have
question.
TikTok app on my phone and my phone is on my home Wi-Fi network, does TikTok access that network?
It will have to access the network to get connections to the internet, if that's the question.
Is it possible then that it could access other devices on that home Wi-Fi network?
and it seems like most people think that it was a measure taken out of preserving privacy more than anything. So maybe we should be thinking a little bit more critically about how the TikTok ban, or privacy in general, is kind of integrated nowadays with modern technology, philosophy, and ethics. I think that there's a lot of different categories to privacy though, because there's your personal privacy, then there's societal safety, there's government oversight, there's children and family dynamics, and then there's technology. How did our expectations of privacy even come to be? Is it even possible to be private anymore? Like I said earlier, some of us really crave privacy, but feel perfectly comfortable sharing our lives on social media. Platforms like TikTok, Instagram, X, they're all literally built on the back of voluntary oversharing. Some people share their political opinions, some people share their embarrassing first date stories. Some people I've even seen on TikTok share their journeys to sobriety and use their social media audience to try and hold them accountable. Before social media and smartphones in general were just accessible in anybody's jean pockets, it seemed like this information was really only shared within your social circle. Celebrities might have ushered in the phenomena of paparazzi, but now anybody can just kind of sacrifice their privacy to the social media gods. And people tune into this. Like one of my favorite videos, my comfort video, if you will, is top 10 worst YouTuber apologies, and it has over 7 million views. Even conservative data on how much time we spend on our phones usually clocks in at about 2 hours a day. So is it fair to demand privacy when we uphold a system that completely exploits it? Answering this question for yourself might reveal your real feelings about censorship on the internet. Should we allow social media content to include things that we feel are actually a violation of our privacy? And even if you answer no to that, are you still guilty of consuming that kind of content? If Taylor Swift and Jack Antonoff were having a private listening party to her new unreleased album, would you watch a live stream of somebody standing outside of Taylor Swift's home holding their phone up to the window? The panopticon is a design of an institutional building with this built-in system of control, thought of by the English philosopher and social theorist Jeremy Bentham in the 18th century. You'll read on Wikipedia that the concept is to allow all prisoners of an institution to be observed by a single corrections officer without the inmates knowing whether or not they're being watched. Although it's physically impossible for one single guard to observe all the inmates' cells at once, the fact that the inmates cannot know when they're being watched motivates them to act as though they're all being watched all the time. They're effectively compelled to self-regulation. Social media kind of acts as like a digital panopticon where we're both the observers and the observed, and that kind of alters our behavior as if we're under some sort of surveillance. French philosopher Michel Foucault's theory primarily addressed how power dynamics influence the amount of privacy we're willing to give up. Foucault suggests that power is not something that is owned by a few people or groups, but rather is created and maintained through discourse and regulation. If you could have complete privacy, but it meant that you had to give up your ability to instantly connect or observe others, would you take it? Let's talk about government oversight. There were a lot of changes that happened in America after 9/11. The Patriot Act was signed in order to intercept and obstruct terrorism. This law was signed by Congress and passed into law by George W. Bush. This included expanding surveillance, allowing for more information sharing between law enforcement and intelligence agencies, and tightening immigration and border security. President Bush also allowed the NSA to conduct warrantless wiretapping as a secret executive order. The NSA started monitoring phone calls, text messages, and any sort of internet activity that was affiliated with people who were suspected to be involved in terrorist organizations. Essentially, we traded security for increased surveillance and less privacy. But I guess the question that's kind of hard to answer is, did it actually make things more safer? I mean, Did it not just lead to more data collecting and radical profiling? And don't misread my tone. I actually don't know what the answer to that question is. And I mean, none of us really ever will, because none of us will know what life would be like if none of those things had happened. English philosopher John Locke, who famously believes that sovereignty resides in the people, had this idea of the social contract, which speaks to how individuals and governments interact. In his view, humans are born with natural rights, life, liberty, and property. But they enter a social contract when they form societies. This contract essentially means giving up some individual freedoms in exchange for collective benefits like security, law, and order. So how much liberty are we willing to give up for that societal protection? Where's the balance between giving individuals their freedom, but also having a government body to make sure that they stay safe? Locke believed that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed. And if people feel as if their privacy is being violated, well then, it seems like the government isn't really acting in their best interest or with their consent. Thomas Hobbes believed that the only way to maintain a state of peace in a society is to institute an impartial and absolute sovereign power, kind of like the final authority on all political issues. The United States does not feel the need to Mirandize or wait for lawyers before questioning anybody who's a suspected terrorist. When Roe v. Wade was recently overturned, there was a whole discussion about whether courts of law should be able to subpoena data from period tracking apps. So another way to phrase the question is, if compromises in our privacy could truly prevent things like acts of terrorism or bank robberies or murders or whatever, would it be worth it? How about privacy for kids and families? There's a balance to be found between giving children that respected kind of autonomy that they deserve, while also trying to keep them out of harm's way. And I think that that's a pretty safe place that we can all agree and we can start that conversation. It was kind of a question for me growing up whether my parents should have the ability to read my journal or my sister's diaries. But now, in wake of the new TikTok ban, I've started asking myself, should parents be able to go through their kids' social media profiles? Which is crazy. I mean, it's a brave new world. That's a little bit apples to oranges. I mean, diaries are like literally marketed as that confidential and unwavering book of privacy. I remember just starting to get into writing songs when I was like 8 or 9 or something, and I had this like book of lyrics, and I remember my mom found it and started reading through them, and they were so cringy and so bad. I was so embarrassed, and I remember that feeling. It's kind of funny to laugh about now, and it was super inconsequential, but I remember that feeling, and I remember thinking like, oh, I specifically asked for this to be a private matter, and you kind of ignored that. I understand the thought process, of course. If my kid was the one who was writing the lyrics to like Cute Without the E by Taking Back Sunday and I found them, I'd be sending them to a psychiatrist. But how do you walk the line with social media with your kid? Do you say like, hey, nothing you do can ever be so private that even I, your parent, can't access it? Do you offer them some sort of like doctored or fake respect, being like, I'll just allow them to believe that there's no way that I can actually cross that line with them, but I know that I really can. I mean, we're living with the first generation of kids that has grown up with smartphones in their pocket. It was like just on the tipping point of that when I was growing up. Like by the time that I was in high school, it was in full swing, but prior to that, it was still like a little bit uncommon really to know somebody in middle school especially who had a phone, and especially somebody who had social media. This video is actually not meant to be about kids and their relationship with social media, because I think that that's such a good topic that it kind of deserves its own whole video. But just be careful when you're making that decision of how you want to raise your kids, because there's actually data that shows that, well, if you go a little bit too strict, they're probably going to act out. So tight regulations on your desires to monitor what comes across your kid's For You page might just kind of work against you. But you can't be too loose with the regulations, or else you're going to be a neglectful parent. There's just no winning, right? I like to think of it as like maybe there's just no losing, because sometimes kids are just going to do whatever the hell they want and you just don't get a choice. Rousseau had this idea that childhood is a true form of innocence and that it's society that corrupts it. But he didn't say anything about if privacy is a learned concept or if it's innate. We actually learn a lot from things like fear, punishment, or embarrassment. The feeling of your heart sinking into your stomach when your sister reads your AIM messages with your 7th grade girlfriend is enough of a driving force to make me think that maybe privacy, or lack thereof, is actually a learned concept. In fact, there's something else that actually leads me to think that privacy is really a learned concept. Some societies, especially ones that are removed from 21st century technology, are raised with a lot less privacy than us. The San, a South African society, live in these communal settings, and their privacy is a lot more limited. They often just sleep together in open spaces or shared huts. Things like social activities or eating or storytelling and even decision making happen in public, leaving a lot less room for private individual lives. Do kids need privacy to grow, or is it more important to have the parent's job be to monitor them? Is that rebellion that I was talking about earlier kind of inevitable? Maybe what shows up on your kid's For You page is not inevitable, but something that is that you're being listened to by your home devices. It's highly suspected, or by that I mean it's like legitimately been proven by some, that devices like Alexa, Siri, or even just your smartphone are always listening to us. Plenty of reports show that these devices actually collect passive data even when they're not active. Hannah Arendt, a political philosopher who I've actually mentioned before on this channel, wrote extensively on the tension between privacy and public life, particularly in her works like The Human Condition. She makes a distinction between the private realm, where individuality and personal concerns exist, and the public realm, where people engage collectively in politics and society. Arendt saw the private realm as essential for cultivating individuality and protecting people from the exposure and judgments of others, but she also recognized that true freedom in action could only occur in the public realm. Arendt believed that privacy is where people develop themselves as individuals, away from the pressures and expectations of society. Without it, individuals might lose their sense of self. Is the erosion of privacy through surveillance or social media exposure threatening individual development and freedom? Or does transparency in public life create accountability and safety? We're also the earliest humans to experience how targeted ads and data breaches and agreeing to terms of service actually gives up our privacy. Targeted ads really make me think, because on its face, the word targeted has such a connotation to it. I mean, who likes to be targeted? But are we just afraid of them the way that like a gambling addict is afraid of the casino? Is there something in the human DNA that just makes our resistance to targeted ads completely futile? Kind of leads me back to the question that I was asking earlier, which is, I mean, who's the one to blame if we're the one participating in a system that just openly invades our privacy? I can tell you that when I get that box that says, do you agree to the terms of service, I'm not reading that long ass thing. I usually just click it and hit agree. It's like everyone was saying that if you downloaded Red Note, you were secretly agreeing to participate in the draft. I'll just throw myself under the bus again and say that we probably aren't doing ourselves any favors by just flippantly clicking these boxes that say, yes, I agree, or allowing our phones to have access to our microphones. As a frequent therapy goer, I also sometimes think about how my privacy in therapy is also kind of limited to, as long as I'm not a danger to myself or others. And this kind of makes me think of it from the opposite lens, not as when is the invasion of privacy a bad thing, but when is it our moral obligation to invade somebody's privacy? As somebody who's benefited greatly from therapy, I can see why these regulations are put in place and I support them. I mean, I can actually see how invading somebody's confidentiality in rare instances can save their life. Do we have a moral obligation to invade somebody's privacy if we notice that they're plotting a regime or planning a murder or something? If you know anything about me from watching previous videos, you know that I am a firm believer in standing up for people who feel like they don't have a voice. It just gets more complicated sometimes when you're talking about infringing on somebody's legal rights. There's something kind of hard to wrap your head around at first about, if you live in the United States, for example, it being perfectly legal for plenty of people to just congregate amongst each other and talk about some truly harmful ideas. I also sometimes think about how people with top-level clearances kind of give up their privacy in order to try and protect other people around them. I know when political figures come here in Erie, there's tons of people that get flagged and interrogated and marked because they might be a potential threat, and their privacy is invaded for the sake of it hopefully protecting everybody else. And again, part of it is just because the idea, at least, is to try and keep everybody else safe. Immanuel Kant's ethical philosophy, particularly his idea about individual autonomy and this thing that he calls the categorical imperative, kind of give a framework for considering privacy. Kant emphasizes the inherent dignity of individuals and the need to treat people as ends in themselves rather than a means to an end. Kant's philosophy suggests that respecting a person's autonomy includes respecting their privacy. When we violate somebody's privacy, like by surveilling them without their consent, we treat them as a means to an end, whether for security, profit, or control, rather than as autonomous beings worthy of respect. So needless to say, he kind of shares the opinion of some other people in the United States who don't really buy that whole protecting us thing by invading our privacy. Again, it all just kind of depends on if you think that we're really being protected, if we're just being made to think that we're being protected. I will say there's something pretty obviously suspicious about the fact that TikTok was down for 24 hours, then came back right around Inauguration Day. But hey, what do I know? I actually kind of think that sometimes both of these things can be true. But that kind of brings me to this thing called the universalization test. Kant's categorical imperative kind of asked, well, what if everybody acted in this way? What happens if privacy becomes completely obsolete through things like surveillance or data collection? I mean, does society just become unjust because individuals can't freely act without external interference? Or what if everyone demanded absolute privacy? Could this just undermine societal safety from bad actors trying to exploit it to harm others? I know I did a lot more asking questions and answering questions today, but I mean, the truth is I just don't really know if I have the answers to a lot of these questions, and I don't know if any of us really do. The TikTok ban definitely had me thinking and asking some more questions though. I know that much. It's kind of a silly or funny modern example of like our rights to privacy, but I do kind of think on some deeper level it's a little bit more serious than we think. I think I ultimately just feel very unsure or uncertain about the motivations behind the ban in the first place. There were actually some reasons that I was kind of just excited to kiss TikTok goodbye regardless of all this information about data farming and privacy invasion, and I was mostly just kind of curious to see what the elected officials were saying about it. We like to think that privacy is a right, but is it really just more of a privilege that we've taken for granted in this world that doesn't really support privacy? Maybe you guys have the answers, so drop a comment below if you like this video, and maybe you can chime in with your own insights. Thank you so much for watching, and a little heads up, I think I'm gonna start putting my YouTube videos on my Patreon early, meaning as soon as I'm done editing them, which is usually like a week or two in advance. So if you wanna pay $1 a month and watch these videos early, and also learn how to play guitar or how to use Logic Pro, or hear any of my unreleased original music, click the link in the description.